Welcome to your massive history lesson. We're going to go over six musical and the six most popular wives of Henry VIII. Henry VIII had more than six wives, but these are the very popular ones, the most popular, which caused six musical. We have Amberlynn, Anne of Cleves, Jane Seymour, Catherine Parr, Catherine of Aragon, and Catherine Howard. So, yeah, let's just jump right in. She was 3 years old. She was betrothed to Arthur, the Prince of Wales. They got married in 1501. He died 5 months later. She held the crown of the Aragonese crown to England in 1507. She was the first known female ambassador to the crown in European history. In 1509, she marries Henry VIII, the younger brother of Arthur, the Prince of Wales. So, for 6 months in 1513, she served as regent of England while Henry VIII was in France. During that time, the English, crushed and defeated the Scottish at the Battle of Flodden, an event which Catherine herself played an important part with an emotional speech about English courage. By 1525, Henry VIII was infatuated with Anne Boleyn, meaning he was very into her and wanted her, longing for her, lustful, lust, wanting. And he was dissatisfied that his marriage to Catherine had not produced any surviving sons, leaving them with their daughter, the future Mary the First of England, as their presumed, at the time, heir to the throne. Now, there wasn't a precedent for a female on the throne, so he sought to have his marriage annulled because saying it wasn't lawful that she had married his brother before him, even though his brother had died and he chose to marry her. He wanted it annulled. Didn't happen. Setting into motion a chain of events that led to England's schism, which is just the spirit of division between strongly opposed sections of parties caused by different opinions or beliefs. And with the Catholic Church, when the Pope Clement VII refused to annul the marriage, Henry defied him by assuming can't pronounce the word, supremacy over religious matters. In 1533, their marriage was consequently declared invalid, and Henry married Anne on the judgment of clergy in England, the king's rightful wife and queen, attracting many popular sympathies despite she was acknowledged only as the Dowager Princess of Wales by Henry. After being banished from court by Henry, she lived out the remainder of her life at Kimbolton Castle and died there on January 7th, 1536 of cancer, because there's not really a cure. And even if there was, back then there was not any way to cure something like that. So most people died from diseases. So it was not uncommon for people to technically die young. 50 is very young. From the standards of back then, that was a very good age. Throwing that out there. The English people held Catherine in high esteem, and her death set off a tremendous mourning. So, also, she was not allowed to see her daughter, which is something they don't mention on the wiki page. Henry VIII would not let her daughter Mary see her. So when she was sick or wanted her mom, couldn't have her. And he would not let her mourn her mother. She was to address Anne Boleyn as her mother. Not fair, but it's what he did. He was not a fair man. He's not very nice either. You don't lock someone up because you don't want them anymore. Basically, she would not agree that the marriage was annulled. She didn't want an annulment. She wouldn't sign for one. And she did not believe their marriage was done until the day she died. That's how Catherine was. And it makes sense. In the vows, till married, till death do you part. And you're married. But no, that's Catherine's story. Let's move on to Amberlynn. Okay, Amberlynn. So, Amberlynn was born in 1501. They don't have an exact date. Somewhere in July of 1501. In early 1523, Anne was secretly betrothed to Henry Percy, son of Henry Percy, 5th Earl of Northumberland. But the betrothal was broken off when Earl refused to support their engagement. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey refused the match in January 1524, and Anne was sent home to Hertford Castle in February and March of 1526. Henry VIII began to pursue Anne. She resisted his attempts to seduce her, refusing to become his mistress, which her sister Mary had been at the time. Henry soon focused his desires on annulling his marriage to Catherine so that he could freely marry Anne. Wolsey refused to obtain an annulment of Henry's marriage from Pope Clement VII, and in 1529 or 1530, Anne helped begin and bring about his downfall and his death. When it became clear that Clement would not annul the marriage, Henry and his advisors, such as Thomas Cromwell, began the breaking of the Catholic Church's power in England and closing the monasteries and the nunneries. In 1532, Henry made Anne the Marquise of Pembroke. It's a title of prestige in England created by Henry VIII for Amberlynn. Henry and Anne formally married on the 25th of January, 1533. After the secret wedding on the 14th of November, 1532, on the 23rd of May, 1533, newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury Thomas Cranmer declared that Henry and Catherine's marriage null and void. 5 days later, he declared Henry and Anne's marriage valid. Shortly after, Clement excommunicated Henry and Cranmer. As a result of the marriage and these excommunications, oh my gosh, that one word, the break between the Church of England and Rome took place, and the king took control of the Church of England. Anne was crowned Queen of England on the 1st of June, 1533. On September 7th, she gave birth to the future Queen Elizabeth I. Henry was appointed to have a daughter he was disappointed to have a daughter rather than a son, and hoped that a son would follow and profess to love Elizabeth. Anne subsequently had 3 miscarriages, and by March 1536, Henry was courted with Jane Seymour. In order to marry Seymour, he had to find a reason to end the marriage with Anne. Henry had Anne investigated for high treason in April 1536. On May 2nd, she was arrested and sent to the Tower of London, where she was tried before the jury of peers, including Henry Pierce, her former betrothed, and her uncle Thomas Howard, the 3rd Duke of Norfolk. She was convicted on May 15, not years, and beheaded 4 days later. Modern historians view the charges against her, including adultery, which is cheating while you're married or while you're dating. It's having sex with someone else while you're in a relationship. And incest. I should not have to explain what that is. It's very disgusting. But Yet followers. Mm-hmm. It's when you have intercourse with family members. Very disgusting. And plotting to kill the king, aka treason, and was convicted. After her daughter Elizabeth was crowned as queen in 1558, Anne became venerated as a martyr and a heroine of English Reformation, particularly through the writing works of John Foxe. Over centuries, she has inspired and has been mentioned in many artistic and cultural works, and thereby retaining her hold on popular imagination. She has also been called the most influential and most important queen consort of England that England has ever had, as provided the occasion of Henry VIII to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and declare the England's church independent from the Vatican. Yeah, that's her story. It's really, I don't have much to say on her. Um, yeah, her story's just full on out there. There's nothing that's in that story that Wiki didn't have. So, let's move on to Jane Seymour. Quick fact. Um, Amberlynn died from anywhere between the ages of 28, 35. Very young, not the youngest, but still very, very, very young. So let's move straight on to Jane Seymour. So she's the third queen following Anne Boleyn. After Anne was beheaded, the 30th of May, 1536, Henry married Jane. Now, Jane dies the next year after giving birth to her son less than 2 weeks later from postnatal complications. Complications after giving birth, because they couldn't really treat you after giving a baby properly. They couldn't properly treat you to make sure you were good. Most people then did die from giving birth to babies. It is a very low percentage now, but it does happen. But it happened more back in the 1500s because we didn't have medicines or proper health care of any kind. But there's this one line from the song Ex-Wives, and Jane goes, "The only one he truly loved," and everyone else goes, "Rude." And she says, when my son was newly born, I died technically, but she lived almost 2 weeks after her son was born. So, wasn't instant death. So, yeah. I'm mentioning that. Technically, she was the one he truly loved. She didn't live long enough to irritate the hell out of him like the rest of them did. She is also the only one that got buried beside him. He had so many wives, but she's the only one he chose. But mostly people think that is because she's the only one that gave him a son. I don't know if Catherine Parr gave him a son. I'll look, because we're going through a big history lesson. But that's why people think that she was the favorite. Possibly. Could be. Because, as we know right now, Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn gave him daughters. The one time Anne Boleyn had a son, which that is the one thing that was mentioned, it was a miscarried baby. So she lost the son, sadly. So the only thing she produced for him was a girl, which he was not happy about. So let us move on to Anna of Cleves. Okay, Anna of Cleves. It's Anne of Cleves, not Anna. I don't know why I say Anna. It's Anne. But, yeah, let's have fun with this one. So, Anne of Cleves was Queen of England from January 6th to July 40th, 1540, as the fourth wife of Henry VIII. Not much is known about her before 1527, when she became betrothed to Francis, Duke of Parr, son of the heir Anton, Duke of Lorraine. Although their marriage did not proceed, in March 1539, negotiations for Anne's marriage to Henry began, as Henry believed that he needed to form a political alliance with his brother William, who was leader of the Protestants to Western Germany, to strengthen his position against potential attacks from the Catholic French, and the Holy Roman Empire. Anne arrived in England on the 27th of December 1539 and married Henry on January 6th, 1540. But after 6 months, the marriage was declared unconsummated, and as a result, she was not crowned queen consort. Following the annulment, Henry gave her a generous settlement, and she thereafter known as the king's beloved sister. She lived to see the coronation of Queen Mary I, outliving the rest of Henry's wives. All right. So, the reason, it's basically he paid her off, gave her a nice castle, gave her all the money and riches she could ever want. Anything she needed, he provided it for her. And all because he didn't want to send her back to Germany and they start a war. It's the only reason. Had she not been from Germany and he didn't want to start fights with them or war, he would have just been done with her. Not much is really known about her at all. So, she died July 16th, 1557. She was about 41 or 42. Now, living into your 40s is very rare for anyone who lived then, because like I said earlier, the slightest disease could have killed you because there was nothing to help them. Like, there was no medications like we have now. There was nothing that could really help them. And so, yeah, let's move on to Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard. Let us do this. All right. So, Catherine Howard. I can't find her birth. Okay, she was born sometime in 1523 or around then. She was the fifth wife of Henry VIII. She was daughter to Lord Edmund Howard and Joyce Coupler, cousin to Amberlynn, the second wife of Henry VIII, and niece to Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk. Thomas Howard was a prominent politician at Henry's court, and he secured her a place in the house of Henry's, the fourth wife, Anna of Cleves, where she caught the king's interest. She married him on July 28th, 1540, at Oatlands Palace in Surrey, just 19 days after the annulment of the marriage to Anne of Cleves. He was 49, whilst she was just a teenager. She was 17. Catherine Howe was stripped of her title as queen on November 1541, where she was beheaded 3 months later on the grounds of treason for committing adultery with her distant cousin, Thomas Coupler. She was 19 when she died. Basically, a law passed that you had to tell the king if you had sex before marriage, of which happened after they were married for more than a couple months. So she was doomed from the start. They gave you a month to state whether you had done it or not. And since they made the rule and she failed to mention it, it was considered treason and she was beheaded. She was 19, 18 or 19. No one quite knows, but just she was the youngest to get beheaded from the popular queens or wives of Henry VIII. Honestly, hers is really just sad because she really didn't get a chance. I'm just saying. But yeah, now we move on to the last wife. Last wife, Catherine Parr. Now, she outlived him. That is why she's so important. No, not really. Catherine was the Queen of England and of Ireland between 1543 and 1547, as one of the last of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. The final queen consort of the House of Tudor, she married him on July 12, 1543, and outlived him by a year and 8 months. With 4 husbands, she's the most married English queen. She was the first woman to publish under her own name in English in England. Catherine enjoyed a close relationship with Henry's 3 children and was personally involved with the education of her stepchildren Elizabeth and Edward IV. She was influential in Henry's passing the Third Succession Act in 1543 that restored both daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, to the line of succession in the throne. Catherine was appointed regent from July to September of 1544, while Henry was on a military campaign in France. And in case he lost his life, she was to rule as regent until Edward came of age. However, he did not give her any function in government in his will. In 1543, she published her first book, Psalms and Prayers, anonymously. On account of Catherine's Protestant sympathies, she provoked the enmity of anti-Protestant officials who sought to turn the king against her. A warrant for her arrest was drawn in 1545. However, she and the king soon reconciled, and her book, Prayers or Meditation, became the first book published by an English queen under her own name. She assumed the role of Elizabeth's guardian following the death of the king and published a second book, The Lamentations of the Sinner. Henry died January 28, 1547. After the king's death, Catherine was allowed to be queen. She was allowed to keep the queen's jewels and dress as Queen Dowager. About 6 months after Henry's death, she married her 4th and final husband, Thomas Seymour, 1st Baron Seymour of Sudley. The marriage was short-lived, and she died on the 5th of September, 1548, due to complications after childbirth. Told you, it's not uncommon. Parr's funeral was held on the 7th of September, 1548. Parr's funeral was the first Protestant funeral in England, Scotland, or Ireland to be held in English. There's a history lesson. So next time, we're going to do Hamilton.